Can I ask Professor Paget Henry, Interim Chair of Africana Studies, to welcome us? Professor Henry.
My name is Paget Henry, and I am the Chair of Africana Studies. And on behalf of our department and all of the other partners in this historic event, let me say a very warm and hearty welcome to all of you.
Thank you very much.
This is indeed a historic moment, and for me personally, a very special moment. I was born and I grew up on the Caribbean island of Antigua, and I came to the United States in 1964, which was the heart of the civil rights movement. My vision of America was determined by the political activities of some of the people here in this room. I came to America at a time when I was at City College, and on my first day at City College, as you know, the students, the various campus organizations were all laid out, and there was the John Birch Society, the White Citizens Council, and they were all there. And within a year, the second year I was there, they were no longer there. The tables were there, but nobody signed up. That was the impact of this movement. It determined my vision of America. I had never seen America the way it was before. So I owe to the people in this room a great debt for which I will be forever thankful. I get very concerned when I see America fall away from that vision, because I think it is a great one. It's what I think the Constitution of America really projected forward for America. So as we gather here to celebrate the legacy of this great struggle, let us also remember that we need to carry forward the vision, because it has not yet been achieved. But that's not for today. Today, it is our task to welcome, to celebrate those who were the stormtroopers, the leaders, right, of this great transformative movement. So on behalf of the Africana Studies Department and the larger Brown community as a whole, let me say welcome to all of you, and of course, very, very, very special welcome to all of these SNCC veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Henry. I want to add my special welcome to you all. My name is Tony Bogues, the director of the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, and a member of the Africana Studies Department. This is a special moment. It is so special that we might want to call it extraordinary. We have here today commemorating the Brown-Tougaloo 50th year partnership. We have here in this community commemorating that partnership individuals who contributed to the making of that successful partnership. And then in the midst of that, we have the SNCC veterans, one of who went to Tougaloo for a while. So this is a special moment because of the centrality of Tougaloo to what Charlie Cobb has called the Southern Freedom Movement. Such a special moment, a double special moment, makes this weekend, quite frankly, extraordinary in Brown's history. The contribution of what you have is a juxtaposition of the anniversary of the 250 years of Brown, a commemorative event in which the SNCC veterans are central, a dedication a couple of weeks ago of the Slavery Memorial just across that green. So all of that, I think, poses a moment of reflection for us, a reflection about the history of the nation, but also about the possible futures of this nation and what it might become and how we might make it what it should be. So in welcome you, I want to start with that. But I also want to welcome you and introduce this panel and Charlie by talking a bit about how we got where we are in this room. About a year ago, the Africana Studies Department and the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice, the Africana Studies Department about 2 years ago, then led by Professor Corey Walker, put together with the Center for Slavery and Justice a proposal in which we talked about having an event for the 250th that had to do with Tougaloo and the SNCC veterans. That proposal was accepted by the 250th Anniversary Committee, and we are here because of that proposal and the acceptance of the 250th and funded by them. So I'd want to thank the 250th Anniversary Committee for funding this. And then I'd also like to thank the Maitri from the Associate Dean of the College for working very hard to make this happen. The idea of this particular panel was for the SNCC veterans to talk about their experiences in Mississippi and to make that particular perspective and their work in Mississippi central to the entire week or the entire events of the panels. Why are they here, these SNCC veterans? They're here not just because of the proposal that we put in. They're here because one of the things that the Center for Slavery and Justice is trying to do is to develop an oral history project and an oral history archive of African American freedom in this country. Brown Library, Hay Library, John Hay Library, has a 19th century set of papers of black abolitionists. And we are now trying to sort those out and make that part of an African American freedom papers. And in that particular collection, there are all sorts of tremendous things, from poetry to leaflets to money mission boxes that people used to pass around in black churches so that they could they could buy the freedom of people. So we thought it was important to have the 20th century story. And at the center of that 20th century story are the SNCC veterans. So that therefore what we are trying to, one of the reasons why they are here, is for us to begin to have this archive of the 20th century African American freedom story. So we have the 19th to the black abolitionist papers, and we will hopefully have the 20th. The leaders of this project are the SNCC from the SNCC Legacy Project, and the two critical people for us here are Charlie Cobb, who was a visiting professor in Africana, is now a visiting fellow at the Center for Slavery and Justice, and Professor Augusto, who is a visiting associate professor at in Africana Studies. What I would also like to do is to thank the President's Office for making available Gardner House so that all the veterans could actually stay together in Gardner House. I know it's an old house, and there are some things that old houses demand, fire codes demand, that we can't have certain burners in there, so you can't cook certain things and so on and so forth. But my hope is that for the week, putting all of them together in Gardner House would have really created a special occasion, because these people, as I have found out in my interaction with them through the week, are not just veterans in the struggle, but are also people who love each other in very, very special ways. So I thought putting them all together in one room would create all sorts of problems, but will also create joy, right? Because that's what how these things happen. So that to have them here is to have the representatives, therefore, of the 20th century African freedom struggle. But it is also very important in terms of trying to develop this archive, that we develop an archive in which the story that is in the archive is told by the participants in that struggle. It is their voices that must be central to questions of memory and the archive. But it is not just about the past and to make sure that there's memory and archive, but it is also very important to have their voices, because we always go back to the archive to think about what the future possibilities must be. And when we go back to that archive and hear their voices, then we will always recall that we must need to keep our own mind on freedom. I want to therefore welcome you all, to give my deep appreciation to all the SNCC veterans, and to thank you all for coming. What you have done as SNCC veterans this week is to remind all of us that the history, or that the forward motion of history, is not about the thoughts of the elite, but is really about the thoughts and the actions of the ordinary person. And if we are going to keep our mind on freedom, then we need to hold that understanding as we walk through the valley and travails of life. So thank you very, very, very much. And I now turn it over to Charlie Cobb. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, and thanks to Brown University and many other agencies. And as I did last night, I have to give a nod to Dr. Hogan as a veteran of the Mississippi Freedom Movement. I deeply appreciate the fact that she has made her campus available to SNCC veterans or movement veterans from Mississippi. They are housed, in the sense of their office, on the Tougaloo campus. And Dr. Hogan made that happen. You will find what we're going to do is I'm going to ask the panel a fairly specific question, one we've been sort of wrestling with all week. And what we've been doing is we've had, in the morning, we have a recorded group session. There are 7 veterans here, only 4 here, and the other 3 you will hear this afternoon. So we have 2 hours in the morning with a camera crew and audio that we have a group discussion, argument, debate. And then in the afternoons, I interview individual veterans about their experience and their thinking. That's been, so there are a couple of questions we've been, as you might imagine, we've been wrestling with all week. And now that I have them out here in front of the public, I'm going to put at least 1 or 2 of them to them by way of opening the discussion. You will find in the program, a brief but fairly detailed profile of each of the veterans. But I would like to take advantage of the people sitting here to say something about each one of them before they speak that really, I think, helps you, or should help you, understand how the Southern Freedom Movement unfolded in the 1960s. And this is a group representing more than Mississippi. Well, I'll get to that in introducing them very, very briefly. But I think there are things about the movement that people don't understand or don't understand fully that I'm very concerned about them understanding and understanding fully. And I think you have a representation of that right here at this table, or with the 7 people who are here at Brown, have been here at Brown for the last week. So I'm going to start. Brenda Travis here from Macomb, Mississippi, along with two of her high school classmates at 16 years of age, walked into the white-only side of the Greyhound bus station. And Macomb in southwest Mississippi is one of the most Klan-ridden, or certainly was one of the most Klan-ridden parts of the state. Up in the Delta where they grew cotton, the planters took great pride in the fact that they didn't wear white sheets. They had a different way of oppressing black people. But down there in southwest Mississippi, where Brenda's from, there was no pretense. But in addition to being an act of great courage, because Brenda spent 6 months in reform school, the school, her high school, expelled her. Because her high school expelled her, the students at the high school, and this is 1961, the students walked out of the high school in protest. And that protest movement in 1961 is the beginning of a process of organizing and protests that began to break down the white supremacist control that existed in Macomb. Most importantly, that protest, triggered by Brenda, produced the first set of full-time SNCC field secretaries in the state of Mississippi. So, and the lesson in that you need to understand is that the Mississippi movement was led by Mississippians, just the way the Southern movement was led by Southerners. Yeah, I came down from Washington, D.C., and other people came down. Reggie, whom I'll talk about later, came down from Baltimore. But fundamentally, the Mississippi movement was led by Mississippians, and Brenda's action almost single-handedly created that first body of young Mississippians. Obviously, there were NACP people who were older, so that's an important piece of her understanding who Brenda is. Now, MacArthur Cotton here from Kosciuszko, Mississippi, was a student at Tougaloo College when the citizens, and he quickly embraced that movement, becoming one of the leaders of that movement. And without going into great detail over MacArthur's whole path, he soon left school to commit full-time to organizing in Mississippi. And the point I want to make in saying that is that as much as protest against segregation and protest against white supremacy were important parts of the movement, the real tradition of the movement is the organizing tradition. Grassroots. You have to understand the movement. You have to understand it and approach it from the bottom up as distinct from the top down. And there's no better representative of that. And it connects to my earlier point with Brenda. Not only was the Mississippi movement driven by Mississippians, it was a movement that organized from the bottom up and sought to find voices to speak for the kind of society they wanted from the bottom up. And that's often missed as we celebrate our marches in Washington or Birmingham or Selma or wherever. So I'm taking advantage of MacArthur's presence. Mukasa Willie Ricks to almost all of us in a lot of ways, represents another aspect of the movement. That's its creativity. You know, and because one of the things that characterized the movement was how ideas bubbled up and how ideas get embraced by participants in the movement and people in communities. And people often forget that as much as we were involved in activism at whatever level, this was a movement in which people thought about the kind of society they wanted. And part of understanding the movement in a meaningful way is understanding the thinking of people. I mean, people didn't just do actions for no reason. There was thought beneath those actions. And I'm using Willie, or Mukasa, old habits, you know. We've all been around each other for better than half a century. So, which I still sort of can't get my mind completely around. So there are habits that are hard to. But anyway, most people think, I'm going to use this one example because Ricks is here. Most people think that the 1966 call, shout out by Stokely Carmichael for Black Power, originated with Stokely. It didn't. And Ricks was the one who shouted out Black Power when Stokely was on the stage. And then Stokely repeated Ricks's call, and the crowd repeated Ricks's call. And you could see Ricks leading the people in this call for Black Power. Now, there's a whole story about Black Power I'm not going to burden you with this morning, but it's also important to understand in his organizing work, largely in Alabama, as well as his organizing, because Ricks was the guy, as the Meredith March was coming down 51 Highway, was going out into the counties, organizing people, and he was using the phrase Black Power as a shorthand for what people needed to think about. Ricks is from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And again, you see in his political life the way ideas, the way thought bubbled up from the bottom. Reginald Robinson here, the Reg, as we so often call him, was one of the first of the young people to commit full-time to SNCC. He had been active with a civic interest group and the protests, the sit-ins and the like in Baltimore, Maryland, where he's from. But when SNCC was formed in 1960, Reggie became one of the first people, young people, to commit full-time for SNCC. And I say that because it's important for you to understand, if you're trying to understand what unfolded in the 1960s, that the unique thing, the new thing that happened in the 1960s was that young people took leadership roles. You know, really, it's not to say young people weren't involved in freedom struggle in earlier years or earlier decades, but what you see very clearly in the 1960s, particularly with the emergence of SNCC and the expansion of the Congress of Racial Equality, is a shift. Young people, often to their parents' dismay, left school and committed to full-time work in the movement in some of the worst places in the South, which is the second point I want to make about Reggie, because shortly after becoming a SNCC field secretary, he went into South. He joined Bob Moses in Brenda's hometown to begin organizing for voting rights in this county. And I know it's hard in the 21st century to get your mind around how dangerous that was, how violent a places like Mississippi or Central Alabama or Southwest Georgia were. So this simple act of going from Baltimore to Macomb, or for that matter, from Berglund High School to the Greyhound bus station, or Kosciuszko, Mississippi, to sit-in protests in Jackson, Mississippi, or Chattanooga, Tennessee, into, well, Rick's has been so many places. It would take the rest of the morning for me to list all those places. But just the courage that's involved in going to these places, these dangerous places, you might have to be young to do that. I tell people ask me how you got involved in the movement in my shorthand. I said, well, I was young and foolish. What did I know? So there's Reggie from Baltimore, Maryland, in Macomb, Mississippi. That's sort of who these people are. They're all organizers. You know, these were the people who dug into the communities in the grassroots. These are not the people that you see yelling into the microphones and leading the program. These are the people who are in the backcountry, in the backwoods, where there's real danger and where just day after day after the day, you literally have to put one foot in front of the other just to keep going and to figure out how to talk to people who are terrified. Now, that's all I have to say about this group of people and the people you will be meeting this afternoon, because there's a whole nother set in the audience here. You know, we have a too large a group even at 7 to try and get everybody sitting at once, as our good friend Joyce Ladner likes to say. She was SNCC field secretary. She says, SNCC people will argue with a lamppost. So I dared not bring everybody up here all at once. So there is a question we've been struggling with, and I'm literally going to ask each participant to respond to it, starting with Brenda. We'll just go all the way over to Reggie. And trust me, not everybody's ideas are the same. The question is this. Look, the movement, meaning the Southern movement, was demonstrably successful in some respects. If you look at the period, say, between 1960 and 1965, you do see in 1964 the emergence of a Public Accommodations Act that begins to break down segregation, racial segregation in public accommodations. And if you look at 1965, you see a Voting Rights Act, which begins to open the door to black voter registration. In Lowndes County, one of the places Ricks worked in, there was only one person registered to vote in 1964. One black person in a county that's 80% black. And a year after the Voting Rights Act, black voters were a majority of the voters in the county. So there's demonstrable success at some levels. But, and I should say, I'm trying to, in this discussion, push the discussion not just in terms of memory of what people did. Believe me, they could go on and on and on with the stories, but also connect it to life today. It seems to me that one of the things you want to do in conversation about the Southern movement is try and connect it to what we're looking at today. So that being said, we can say this demonstrable success, notwithstanding, at least in inner cities, whether they are Northern or Southerners, you could make the case that black life has gotten worse. More violence. We haven't solved these enormous economic problems that we were beginning to get a glimpse of in the 1960s. I mean, there are huge issues. Education. I mean, the question of whether or not public schools will actually educate people is very much up in the air. Not a problem we solved in the 1960s. So we have these areas of work that remain to be done, areas of struggle that remain to be engaged. So my question, Brenda, Matt, Ricks, Reggie, and you may find that my premise false in framing the question. Where did we fail? And what's useful from our experiences for the kind of work that needs to be done today?
Dude, that's
I know, it's unfair to ask such a large question and tell you, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, stop laughing, Charlie, so I can have my 5 minutes. Sometimes it's difficult to know where we failed. I can say how we failed, and why we failed was because we were fearful. Well, what we didn't do is we didn't go back and continue to organize and educate our young people to carry on the fight. Now, today, we're still realizing that people, even though we say we have like the Voting Rights Act, we have the Civil Rights Act, people are still fearful. I know that in Mississippi, people are ruled by fear. And it's not just physical fear, it's about economic fear. Afraid of losing their jobs. And when we were in the early 60s, there were black business owners, but that black businesses could not sustain the entire communities. And even those who attempted to support the movement and the community still had to depend on the system to issue business licenses, and a case in point is Mr. Fred Bates. When I was in reformatory school, they paid him to bring young people up to the reformatory school to visit with me. They didn't allow them to enter, but when Mr. Bates returned to Macomb, Mr. Bates had 2 businesses. One was the bus business, and the other was a taxi business. They pulled his license for both. So then that created an issue of survival, how he was going to support his family. The same thing happened with my mother, who, as a result of my involvement in the movement, could not get a job in the local city, in Macomb. She had to leave and go into Louisiana. And then from Louisiana, when they found out who she was, she had to leave Louisiana, leaving my siblings behind for someone else to assist in, taking care of them while she was away. And then Mr. Young, Jack Young, who was one of the
3 black attorneys.
Yeah, one of attorneys, yeah. He was able to find her a job in Jackson with a black-owned business person, where she went until she was able to return to Macomb. So it's still, the problem still exists where people are afraid to get involved because, for economic reasons, I should say. Is my time up? Okay. Anyway, people are still afraid, and it's like coming back to Macomb and talking with people and talking about voting and registering to vote. It's almost, they want no part of it because they feel that we've failed them. But it wasn't so much our failure. I think that what they did is not realize the power that they had in the vote or through the vote. So then, therefore, they didn't lose that intimidation factor.
Okay.
Okay.
We'll come back to that
All right.
anyway. Yeah. MacArthur?
And the question is, I think that we probably was successful in that when we consider what our goals, the stated goals were. It wasn't, it wasn't revolution. It wasn't economic stability. It wasn't any of those things. Very small voter registration and, public accommodation and integration of public schools. That's basically was what we consider our goals. So in that, we achieved that to become a part of the bigger America, you know. So we are now, the South is more or less like the rest of the part of the country, the rest of America. So in that sense, we could say that we did achieve that, but we didn't achieve freedom, because freedom first is a constant struggle, as we know. And also I think that part of a mistake that we made probably was 6-4, the summer that we brag about, 6-4 summer. I was under the impression that it was a move that was a little too soon, because I felt that we had not built the infrastructure that was necessary to make sure that the people would be able to benefit from the information that we were passing on. And we would spend all our time nurturing, college students from California, New York, or whatever. Meanwhile, losing the opportunity to, really deal one-on-one and collectively with, the people that we were to be serving. And also, we didn't build the kind of movement that would have been, that was sustainable. So I think that probably goes into what Sister Brenda was talking about, even though if we would have done our job correctly at first and educated our people like we should have, it wouldn't have been a question of whether or not we left or stayed or whatever, because it was their civic responsibility to carry out and take care of their communities.
Mukasa?
Good. Would you repeat your question? Sure. Part 1 and part 2.
One, the movement was demonstrably successful in the sense of gaining voting rights and breaking down segregation, discrimination in public accommodations in particular. You no longer get beat up if you try and get a Coke or whatever at a restaurant or coffee shop. That's on the plus side, I think. On the other hand, if you look particularly at inner cities, you see these huge problems, which range from schools to violence to the huge economic problem. So in that sense, there are all of these unanswered questions. Failure, some people, not everybody thinks of it as a failure. They would more moderately put it as I just did. Unresolved problems. Question, how did that happen? Why aren't we in a better place in the 21st century, given the success? And two, what do you find from your own experience in the movement, your own understanding of the movement, by which I mean the Southern movement, that might be useful today in terms of tackling some of these problems?
No problem.
I know.
First, I thank y'all and thank you.
Pull the microphone over.
Thank you very kindly, and I'm very honored to be before you, and very glad to be up here at Brown University. I came up here in 1969, and I spoke, and the students tore the whole city up. And in response, we got a Black Studies program, and changed a lot of things. And look at you today, you're up here with a lot of dignity. But it took bloodshed for even this to happen. And so I'll be looking forward to getting my PhD from y'all brothers from the department soon. Thank you very kindly. Y'all got rewarders now. Don't come empty-handed, come with a reward. And then I would like to say I'm honored to be among Tougaloo people. Tougaloo was the liberated zone when Jackson State and all the other schools was expelling people and running people away and running to the white band of races and taking orders from them. It was Tougaloo met us at the door, welcomed us, fed us, housed us, and believe it or not, Tougaloo even gave me a wife. So we all owe Tougaloo. Thank you, Tougaloo. Thank you, Tougaloo. And believe it or not, that was 40 years ago, and I still got her. And matter of fact, she's so fine, I produced about 3 of her. And thinking about doing another one. Well, when we came south, we found our people in slavery. And the demands that we made was basically asking the slave masters to treat us better. And we fought in bloodshed, and they covered up a few things, but basically we still stayed slaves. And that we fought for the wrong things, really. We fought to take over the courthouse. We should have fought and took over all that land that they had stole from us and become more independent. And that today, even though we fought in Mississippi, fought all over, we still didn't get nothing but a promise from the ones who had lied to us and enslaved us. Civil rights bill, voters' rights bill, but civil rights bill didn't have no silver. And voters' rights bill basically was by the same forces under control that we really had nothing to gain. Even though we voted, the conditions of our people stayed the same. So I'm saying that freedom is, we were young bourgeois students in many ways, and we asked for, what we asked for, it wasn't the real tangible things that would bring the real changes in our people's lives. And that before we were a nation within a nation. We had probably 5 million acres of land. We had businesses, we had hospitals, we had radio stations, and we were more freer. And we could say what we wanted to say. We had leaders with international relationships, and we were more freer. But when we fought and demonstrated and protested and whatever, we got made them back up because we let them know that this wasn't going to be. It's going to be a revolution, or you're going to back up. And when they backed up just for enough to pass a few bills and use that to tighten the noose up on our neck even tighter. Well, we thought we was at the 50-yard line. 50 years later, we were back to the 5-yard line. And now we witness our people are jobless. The men has been taken out the home into the prison industrial complex. The children are taken out of schools, school prison pipeline. Our communities have been drugged in the streets. And so we are under attack, and the attack has not stopped. And that, so I can look back 50 years ago, but look now. Our people and children, every time a young brother leave home, his mama wonders if he's coming back. Back in the day, you wonder whether he was going to be hung. Now you wonder will he be shot in the back, murdered, and we know won't nothing be done about it. So the same injustice we had 50 or 100 years ago, we have today. And so I'm saying that we are in a revolution. And freedom is fought over land. When they fought for freedom in all the different countries I see many of you from, in Cuba and other places, you fought over land. And you gain land, you gain government, you gain your army, you gain your educational system you were able to do for self. And here, we just got a promise from some people that had lied to the Indians. You remember, the Indians said, white man speak with forked tongue. And they were telling the truth. The only promise they made that they kept, that they were going to steal their land, and they stole it. And today, we have absolutely nothing. Our conditions are worse. Our motherland, and we have very few, that's why we have African studies programs in these schools to teach us about our homeland, our culture, our history, our language, our roots, our gods, and who we are. And today, our children and this don't know who they are. They don't know their language. They don't know their culture, don't know their roots. So I'm saying freedom is fought over land. Our land is Africa. And until we link up with our brothers in the Caribbean, South Central America, and Africa, and create our own leadership and be able to have power where we can walk to any country in the world and on an equal base and make demands or trades and work out deals economic deals and political deals or whatever kind of deals we want to work out for ourselves, then you have black power. But as long as you got a government, somebody else speaking for you, somebody else got power, somebody else telling you what to do, somebody, your slave master writing your check, then you're still a slave. And I don't care how high a position you be in, whether you're in the cotton field down here where my brother come from, or whether you got a PhD, if the slave master writes your check, you still a slave. So I'm saying freedom and liberation come from being totally independent and having power. And again, we should definitely, in all our schools, every school, black school in the community, from elementary school all the way to college, churches, we should be taught our African history, our African culture, and taught what liberation and freedom is around the world and different parts of the world. And those of you that's up in these big schools, Ivy League schools, I think you call them, you should keep demanding and keep teaching our children their culture, and you should do it in a way that you appeal to every African kid that come from anywhere in the world to come in these classes and learn their roots, learn their ancestors, and relate to our community and prepare to come to the community to organize it, educate our people, and prepare to struggle until we are totally liberated and free and have black power. Black power comes from struggling, and it comes from building a nation. We must have our own nation, just like the Chinese got their nation, Koreans got their nation, Vietnamese got their nation, and everybody in the world got their own nation. Where is the black man's nation? Where is our African nation? And we must stop Africa from being exploited and broken down. And I know it's been 3 minutes, but thank you very much.
Oh, boy.
Reggie.
Oh, my God. Every time me and Willie get into this one, I wind up with a backache. But anyway.
It's good as your back as the rest of our teams.
I don't really believe that. I know we lost some grounds, but I like to keep in my mind that I know a little bit about my history, and I believe that I've been in the postures of war for a long, long time. I was one of those kids that dropped out of high school around maybe 10th or 11th grade because I was sitting in a French class. Didn't understand what the lady was saying anyway, but I was looking out the window. I knew what was on the street because I'm halfway on the street already. So I decided that I would go on the street. Now, because I think I survived because I had a very good general in my life, which was my daddy. And he had a good backup, which was my mama. And I had good support because I had both of them. So my daddy would always say, if you're gonna make a decision, you got to be ready to deal with it. And he was the kind of gentleman, if you either go to school or you go to work. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not going to go into my history on the streets of Baltimore, but anyway, I had a cousin by the name of Josephine Thorne who had went to a school known as Cortez Peters Business College. Cortez Peters was a black man that could type 150 words a minute. It was either Royal typewriter or Underwood typewriter that gave him some money, and he opened 3 schools, one in Chicago, one in Washington, and one in Baltimore. And these schools had a very basic operation. They would teach you business operations. They was teaching the sisters how to take shorthand and how to type and how to run an office and then business math, a little business law. And the guys was kind of emphasizing on business law and business math and understanding the wheelings and dealings of things. Well, I got together with my cousin kind of pulled me in and says, you know, you're headed for the wrong direction. So I said, well, what am I going to do? And we talked about this school, and she says, well, you want me to go talk to Uncle Leroy? Now, my daddy loved this cousin because she was one of the ones that have went to school down, and she was a supervisor in Social Security. A couple of other cousins had gone to Social Security under her leadership and everything. So my daddy was really proud of her. So, of course, we went and we charmed my daddy, and he says, okay, Bonky, I'm going to give you another chance. So I wound up at this school called Cortez Peters, and there I met who was the dean. His name was Walter Dixon, and he was this first city councilman, first black city councilman of Baltimore. And he was
Go ahead, Reg.
He was
Switch mics.
He had introduced the public accommodations bill in about along the same time that the students had come out of school, had set in Greensboro. So he had already been involved with the Maryland group that was representative from SNCC. And this is about 61. So then,
Go ahead.
I don't shove it in my mouth. Can't see it the way anyway. But I'm gonna step this story up a little bit here. Yeah. Now, what I believe is that we have been in wars, and we have won some battles. We've got some history, so I don't think that we have lost. We are continuing to fight. I maintain that we go back to organizing, and the reason, and that is that we have gained a lot more since I came in 61 that we have now, because by the time I left SNCC, I was a special gift fundraiser with some people in New York. And I was raising $100 a plate dinners, and I was raising millions of dollars to keep our guys' cars running and keep the office running in Atlanta. I was the support piece. So what my belief is now, the way that we should direct ourselves, I try to make it very simple. We take a bank and set it on the corner, any one of the corners of Macomb, Mississippi, or any other small town that we know we got familiarity. Have monies coming in, have depositors come into that bank. Those who we know with more money than Miss Johnson down the street invest in our bank. And I'm coming from maybe an old theory that was happening in 1921 of Greenwood, Oklahoma. Those folks had resources, they put their money in their banks, and the money ran around in their communities so they could develop the simplest things that you need, the grocery store, the laundromat, the cleaners, maybe a general store for things. But the money ran around, ran around in the community long enough for the community to then take that money outside and start negotiating with the bigger money so that they could continue to do what they did. Well, we all know that they messed up and bombed Greenwood only because a brother was doing his job, working on the elevator, and he happened to step on a white woman's foot, and that started the riot. Well, white folks never liked to see us progress. My mama used to have a joke, don't drive your Cadillac past your boss's house. I maintain that we have enough resources and enough people with money to then come back to the folks down at the bottom where we like to be. Maybe the $10 depositor, maybe Ofri can put in a couple of million in the bank, and then Miss Johnson can put in her 20 cents and be just as much powerful in terms of what happens with that bank and in that community, and that money generates in that community. Then we can sit at the welcome table with any industry and demand exactly what we want, and we're still doing the vote. Now, they scared as hell when we get the vote together and when we get together. But if we had the monies to play the game, I think they would understand that we mean business. And with this bank, I'm an old cowboy watcher. And every time the good guy rides in town, he gets together with the ranchers that's having trouble. And then they take their cattle to the railhead where they can make more money, but the banker says, no, you stay right here, I'm gonna bring the boxcars in. So by the time they take the money and turn their money around, the banker gets his outlaws to come in. Now we get our outlaws to protect what it is that we do. If they come over with bombs, we got enough guys now to know how to take them out of the air too. I'm not kidding, and I'm not jiving. We need to get our money together. We need to protect it and have a protected community and have a black community, because we've seen it. When I came up in Baltimore, I like to talk about an old friend, Mr. Willie. Oh, I'm closing up. I'm closing up. But a prime example of what I'm talking about was a man by the name of Mr. Willie Adams, who was a gangster, brought up against the Senate Rackets Committee in '45. But Mr. Willie had Pennsylvania Avenue, hired people, had the laundromat, had the Royal Theater, which was part of the Chitlin Circuit. I know we can do it if we organize the folks to do it, and it's very simple to do. Have the thought, have the resources, pull the folks together, and move on.
There's a variety of organizing spirit here, so I'd like to drill down a little bit to your organizing experience in the South, around the question of what, from your experience, say in Macomb or in other parts, the Delta, or your work in Alabama, do you think is useful today, or is it just fond memories of brave times? Any of you?
Well, one of the things that we did inside of SNCC, and I think was one of the most effective things, we went to the people and we presented them with a package of freedom, what we felt was freedom, and began to educate them in some kind of way. And I think that our people today don't have education of who we are, where we come from, what our problems are, what's the root of our problems are, and what the roots of our solutions are. And we have so many organizations and groups that only talk on the microphone, but don't go to the people, don't go to the alleys, and don't go to the areas in our communities and talk to our young brothers and sisters. And I think one of the most effective things that SNCC did was set up freedom schools. And I think we need 10,000 freedom schools throughout the community, talking to our young people and organizing them for revolution, teaching them who they are, where they come from, teaching them that they're Africans, teaching them about socialism, teaching them about nations that have gained their independence and freedom and what they had to do. And we need to study other countries and see how they brought their people to power in order for us to bring our people to power. So SNCC's greatest weapon was organizing people and going to the people and setting up little things like freedom schools, but we have to definitely take our movement to the people, to the community, and begin to educate. And so SNCC's greatest contribution to me was organizing. We were organizers.
Yeah, Brenda, and before you answer, let me just add to the question for you to answer. And that is the question that just occurred to me. I mean, to what extent, if we're talking about organizing people, are we just talking about organizing black people? You know, is race less important to organizing work than it was in the 1960s?
I would say absolutely not. Because when you have the masses, whether it be black, white, Hispanic, or whatever, when we're all educated, I believe that we can work together collectively. Now, to address, like the first portion of your question, I recall when we were growing up, it was an all-black school. There was Brown versus Board of Education in 1955, I believe. 1954. I'm a year off. But desegregation of the school system did not come to our town or our state until approximately 11 years later. Was it 15? Okay. Anyway, it was in the 60s before the desegregation of schools. But in the meantime, our teachers, our instructors were so civic-minded. They taught civics in the school system, which was very effective. It made us believe that when we could register to vote, if we got an education, even though parents during that time would encourage you to at least get a high school education. After the system realized how effective these methods were in the black schools and what we as the black students were doing, they took and removed civics out of the school system. So now it's like having to, as far as organizing students, we have to go back and start, from the beginning. Start teaching about civics. Start teaching about our responsibility to each other. We have a responsibility to each other. And, making each other accountable. I teach you, you teach me, and you teach someone else. Just, kick it on down the road. Now, in reverse, we were talking about being civic-minded and getting people to register to vote and stuff, which I walked the street many a day. I'm sorry I didn't keep the shoes, but we walked the street many a day trying to get people or encouraging people to register to vote. Now, even though my brother say that it was, I don't know if you said it was a failure or it was a deception or whatever.
I said both of them.
Okay, it was a failure. What's failing is that we're failing now in that we believe that the Voting Rights Act was here to stay. And then now we're dealing with voter suppression. So we have to come up with a different strategy than we had previously in order to survive or reorganize.
Can I take
What-
a piece of that?
Go ahead, Mac. What are your thoughts on this, Mac?
Give it in, give it in.
I guess what I can say, I didn't have the luxury that it seemed that Brenda and some of you are talking about. I didn't get the opportunity to stop registered voting, to stop, political education, to stop, because I'm living in a community. I'm a part of the community, and when you talk about what we do in the community, now I'm talking about myself, because, I'm the victim of all of those things, and all those things we talk about we should have done, whatever. I don't understand it, because I think if you are a part of the community, you should be doing it. I don't understand. I'm kind of lost on the question. I'm not a veteran. I'm
Like any other situation, one of the most important things I think was with the SNCC is that it was black students that controlled and made policy and made decisions as to how we were going to do something. I maintain in our future, as I talk about this bank on the corner, that it has to be controlled by us, to create for us what we need. And we can sit and talk about all of these things, but without the resources to put the new school together, in order to put the new curriculum together, in order to teach, if you don't control the schools, then you can't control the curriculum. If you can't control the housing situation, then they could raise the rents anytime they want to. I maintain that the new organization that I'm thinking of, yes, every depositor does not have to be black, but the controlling situation, that how it's done and who comes in and what is done there, be decided by those who are in the bank and own the bank, so that if they don't want a cleaners, then we don't do the cleaners. But we must put together resources and have it controlled by us in order for us to expand. Now, if anybody else wants to contribute to our situation, because very early on, I was young and I was invited to speak at Harvard, and some of the young white boys jumped up in the back. Well, if it wasn't for us coming down, doing so and so, you wouldn't remember. I said, all you did was just joined us. You ain't bring us nothing but your body. You ain't bring no resources. We still had to fight for our own resources to do what we had to do. So I maintain that we get our plan, we get our resources, and we move forward.
The mic is not working.
I definitely need one. Yes, the race question is, I think we got to understand that was a gimmick from its inception, and to split people up so that a certain group could control. And we know from the little movement was going on, made us conscious, a few of us conscious, some of us already knew, of our economic situation in this country, where you got, probably, 98%, 2% own most of everything in the country. And the rest of the money is split between all the rest of us, all the other 98%. Well, we know something is more than race involved in that. The schools right now, we at the bottom, because we were slaves, naturally we are at the bottom of this totem pole, so to speak. But the white workers, they not doing very well at all. The so-called middle class, it's not doing well at all. You have people, professors now, working and who really can't afford to send their children to college, and that's unheard of. And then we inherited a system, some of the people my age, when we were going to school, we had to come over, our parents had to come over with $400 or $500. But the state school that we couldn't go to, they was giving, it was free education practically, $50 for a semester and that kind of thing. I mean, it's on the books in Ole Miss students, Tennessee State students, So basically what we have in the economy that is frowned on us, and it's frowned on all of us, and it's going to take all of us to do something about it.
Also, I want to speak to that. And first of all, I want to say there's different levels of oppression. Like you got class oppression that we all suffer from, and then you got racial oppression that we African people suffer from, and then you got the women who suffer from another form of racism, whatever, a three-form oppression, sexism, what have you. And that if we're going to really speak to the problems as a people and really solve our problem and look to the real root of our problem, we got to look at how other people solve their problem. The Jews didn't ask Hitler for the right to vote. They went and formed them a nation, formed them synagogues, formed their language, and created a power base, and they organized Jews, organized Jewish youth, educate them, train them, and teach them to work in the interests of Jews. The Indians did the same thing in India. The Chinese did the same thing. Look at Mao. Mao didn't go to the British or to the imperialists and ask them for the right to vote, or ask them for no equality, or ask them for no welfare. Mao went to there, had a revolution, ran them out, took over China, and now Chinese is the most powerful nation in the world, and the same imperialists that oppressed them trying to borrow dollars from China. And here we come from Africa, the richest land in the world, full of diamonds, gold, oil, rubber, zinc, tea, copper, pearl, cobalt, manganese, everything is in Africa, and that it's ours. And if we take Africa back, China and every other nation in the world will have to come to us. Because in order to build the cars and all the things that China make, they got to come to Africa to get the natural resources. Right now, imperialism don't pay for those natural resources, but they're ours. A strong Africa would make a strong African people anywhere in the world. The reason y'all gonna respect this Indian man sitting right here, he's from India, because if you say something to him, do him wrong, you gotta answer to India. And we need a nation, when they kill Trayvon, they just say, well, that's our slave, and throw him over in the cone and do nothing about it. But if we had our African nation to kill the Chinese, they gotta go talk to China. So here we are African people, we need to relink back to our African culture, relink back to Africa, and let Africa become our spokesman. This country and our slave master don't have no interest in solving our socioeconomic and political problem because they created the problem. So I'm saying that we work with any and everybody in the world that's fighting the class system, but there's nothing wrong with us identifying ourselves as African, wanting to end the oppression of Africa, stop the enslavement of Africa, stop the stealing of our resources, stop the bombing of Africa, stop the warmonger, stop using African slaves to go and fight Korea and Vietnam and Iraq, Iran, all over the world and be for nothing. You get absolutely nothing, and Martin Luther King called America the greatest perpetrator of violence, and we as African slaves, oppressed people, we ain't got no business in no army, fighting no wars. We got one war to free Africa, stop imperialism, stop the exploitation of our people, and free our people. I'm talking about revolution, and that, I have to tell y'all the truth.
Okay. Now you see why people got in the streets after Ricks. I mean, what you say, I don't know whether there wants to be a response or not. But, everybody's exhausted from these
Maybe
different.
Dr. Hogan would like to respond.
But one thing you did, one thing you say raises another kind of question that's worth looking at. And the simplest way to say it, of course, is how you would organize that, but which raises the question of organization. I'd really like to hear, and like people here, to hear how you enter into communities and organize around ideas that are difficult for people, sometimes because of fear and sometimes because of complexity. I mean, even from Mississippi, Mac, I mean, how do you go up into the Delta and put together an organization?
You know, guess what? We were invited into those communities, and that's the way you do it. Often, you know, maybe first was invited into Greenwood, but somebody would come up from Indianola and watch what's going on and say, hey, well, you know, can you come and give us a hand in Indianola? You know, and we were invited. And I would think it would not be wise to go up in a community, call yourself organizing something. You can go and investigate, but call yourself organizing without the people's consent, you probably will have some serious problems.
Brenda?
Yeah. You know, previously, when people came into the South, as Max said, it was by invitation. And by invitation, groundwork had already been laid for these individuals to come into the South by way of the NAACP with Amsey Moore, Mr. Bryant, Mr. Steptoe, and different ones. So, and these are people from different counties, Pike County, Amite County. I don't know where Mr. Moore was, what county Mr. Moore was in.
Bolivar.
Huh?
Bolivar.
Bolivar County. So different counties had structured the foundation for people to come in, basically for voter registration. And it was through the classes in voter registration that people were taught, again, going back to their civic duty, you know, feeling it was their responsibility and their duty to help do something to change the system. So now we come to modern day where the young people have no structure and nobody has laid the groundwork. So we have to start from bottom, because we've bottomed out. We have to start from bottom and then begin to work our way back up in order to organize our youth and young people.
Reg, you have something to say.
When I was trained to organize and became an organizer, there was just certain things that you just did in each case that each place you went into. You had just a few things in mind that you needed to do. You had to first gain the confidence of people, because everywhere that we went into some places where we weren't invited in, and we had to start from scratch. So we had to convince, first of all, the people to understand what it is that they wanted to do. Then you make your plan. And then in order for that plan to happen, a very simple thing is necessary, is resources. Because even if you're planning on just doing voter registration, you got to have clipboards with information on it to pass out. So Staples store ain't gonna just give you clipboards. You have to have some money to buy them. That's what I'm saying. You have to have resources in order to do what it is that you have planned to do. Then after you get your plan together and your resources together, then you come back to the folks and make sure that they are ready to, not maybe whether they're ready to, but they understand the dangers or the pitfalls that they're getting ready to walk into. When we were working with Mr. Herbert Lee down in Amite County, Mr. Lee knew what was happening. He was trying to bring his folks together, but also State Representative Hurst knew what was happening. That's why he came in and killed him. So basically, there's just some basic things you need to know in order to just organize. Have confidence in your people, bring them together, make your plan, get your resources, and implement your plan.
I'd like to inject myself into this organizing question because it's been extremely important in most of my life. And there's some things that I think are important to know, that everybody here knows and perhaps didn't say because they just take it for granted. And I'll start with what Reggie said. The first thing is to go into these towns and counties, you're bringing danger with you. That you are injecting something new in these towns and counties, and that is death because of political struggle. It's not that death wasn't around people, because you had the lynchings, or you had the rapes, or you had just drunken violence by Klansmen and the like. But what you are bringing into these communities as a SNCC field secretary, or indeed as a Corps field secretary, is danger. And people have to take a measure of you as to whether or not the danger you're bringing is worth the risk they're being asked to take. In our case, going down to register to vote at the county courthouse. And they will take their time. They're used to taking their time with judgment. They measure the weather. They measure the land, whether the crops are going to come up. You know, they measure a lot of things. And although we found that there wasn't much reading and writing literacy in these communities, there was an extremely sophisticated people literacy, that they knew how to judge you, whether you were serious or not serious. And boasting was not necessarily convincing, talking about what you were going to do if this man messed with you, because they've been through too much. They've been through too much to take boasting seriously. You had to learn that. You also had to learn, if you were somebody like me, as distinct from somebody like MacArthur. I came from Washington, D.C. So you had to learn from people how to figure out when you were in danger and when you were not in danger. Most of the time you weren't in danger. Sometimes you were in danger, but you had to learn that, and you learned that by listening to people who knew this. They had that skill. I didn't have that skill. So organizing, in short, is a slow process of embedding yourselves in the community, trying to figure out the terms and on which the community will accept you, because it's not just acceptance of your political ideas that count. It's acceptance of a whole range of things. They're curious about you. You know, they're going to invite you to church. They're going to invite you to dinner. Or the young people are going to invite you to play basketball with them. And you have to figure out, you know, what works in the process of revealing yourself so that you can proceed with the organizing. It's a slow process that I don't think people understand today. People knew that they wanted a better society, but they didn't know what the risks were always in terms of trying to get that, especially if Charlie Cobb is coming in here at 19 years of age saying, you know, I think y'all ought to register to vote or something, or organize a labor union or something like that. They had to take a little time to figure that out, and you had to take a little time to figure them out. There's a lot more to, and I know some of the histories of everybody at this table, so I could talk about Reggie Robinson and George Head, a name that won't mean anything to you, but who was the taxi driver that really showed him around. Macomb, Mississippi, you will know Mr. Head, or I could tell you how Charles McLaurin made his way to Fannie Lou Hamer, who would later emerge as one of the leaders of the movement. We walked a fine line, and this may be relevant today, between leadership and organizing. You know, we were there as organizers, not as leaders, although that line gets a little blurry because, after all, MacArthur Cotton is from Mississippi. Brenda Travis is from Mississippi, so they can exert leadership as well as organizing. But we more or less tried to walk the line between leadership, telling people what to do, and organizing, suggesting to people that if they put themselves together, they could challenge this enormous system of white supremacy, which is intimidating. And it was interesting to me as an outsider because you discover that people actually put forth ideas about how best to do that. They put out things that you were not thinking about once they felt comfortable with your presence. Once you had gone through this entire process of, I call it, I have my own shorthand for this process, is the who are your people questions. Because, you know, that's who are your people, where they come from. You know, it's how Reggie sort of got connected to Ella Baker, because she knew his people. I think everybody has that. There's a whole discussion about organizing that perhaps needs to be taken up for its relevance in the 21st century, because how would you organize at this level if you were actually trying to organize, say, in Providence, Rhode Island? Oh, there's a thing saying we're out of time. Oh, my intention was to have you all ask questions. Huh? Okay.
In the next panel.
Okay, I apologize for not leaving any room for questions. So there's another panel after lunch, and then Jerry, Gusto, who is moderating it, will leave time for questions, unlike me.
Thank you all very much for coming. Every time I listen to these veterans, I learn something different. I'm a theater person, I can project. And I'm always given more to think about, so thank you very much. We've really been witnesses this morning to the telling of an important part of the 21st century history, the civil rights movement, and our American history. So thank you very much, panelists. Thank you for your strength. Thank you for your willingness. Thank you for your bravery, and thank you very much for your truth. And Charlie Cobb, thank you for your organizing in the 20th and the 21st century. We really greatly appreciate it. So I'd like to ask you to please thank you, Reggie Robinson. Mukasa Willie Ricks. MacArthur Cotton,